This one. We tend to believe that equality and justice have some kind of value. What does your system say about these two principles, the principles of equality and justice?
That's very broad, but I think the easiest way to tie that in is to say that there is some value to equality in and of itself, and the reason the reason we might care about whether or not people had, to some extent, equal outcomes in life is because there are lots of things about people's entrance into life that they have no control over. So, as I talked about before, you have no control over the quality of your parents, and that can make a big impact on a child's future if they born with bad parents. But on an even deeper level, life itself and coming into the world is something that you're not asked, and you're given an endowment of genes and abilities and talents, and there's no sort of accounting for the talents that you're born with. So some people of no particular fault will be born less intelligent, less attractive, less able to make their way in the particular market society that they were born into. At other times, people will be born more attractive or more intelligent and capable in the market economy they were born into. And they'll reach radically different outcomes and radically different levels of satisfaction and happiness from their life based on accidents of birth. And one way we can see that as being particularly arbitrary is in how the information revolution has made such a difference in the people who were born with highly technical, highly specialized abilities. And so people who were on the autistic end of the spectrum, born in the 1940s and 1950s, had a pretty rough time in life. Maybe if you were particularly capable, you would become some sort of an engineer, work in thermodynamics. But in general, the quarterback really did become successful. As technology and as electronics expanded rapidly, that rapidly increased the returns to being slightly skewed on the autistic end of the spectrum, and people born that way have done very, very well in the last 30 or 40 years. But there's no particular reason why we think the morality of being born slightly on the autistic spectrum has changed in that time, even though the returns have changed dramatically. And so by luck of the draw, if you were born in the 30s when the return was low, you had a rough time of it. If you were born in 2000, when returns were high, you had a really great life, a really great time of it. And so there's some interest you'd say, well, since I don't know where I'm going to be born, and since I don't have any control over that, maybe we should do a little bit to sort of ensure against being born at the wrong time, being born with the wrong skills that are won in that particular moment in history, and that way everyone can be spared the risk of having a particularly unproductive life or miserable life. And so that's sort of the value of equality in this time frame, if that helps. I'll leave it there.
Okay, okay.
Same question.
Yeah, same question, Dr. Brooke, for 4 minutes.
I know it's a shock, but we're all unequal. No matter what you do, we're all unequal. We'll always be unequal. That's just nature. Call it luck, call it whatever you want. It's a fact of reality. And I don't put any moral claim on that. It just is. Some people are born with certain skills and other people are born with other skills. A lot of the skill that we actually see of us as adults, I don't believe is an issue of luck. I think luck is generally overestimated in our culture. It's a matter of choices. It's a matter of decisions. I'm a strong believer in free will. So I don't put any credence in the idea of equality. I think equality is a bogus notion. I think it's a bad idea. The only way, I mean, this is the way I think about equality. Michael Jordan and me playing basketball. How do you make us equal? Well, there's only one way to make us equal. Break his legs. And you probably have to break his arms as well, because he's that good, right? That's the only way to achieve equality, and that's what it means when we talk about equality. So taking people's money to give to somebody else is breaking their legs, right? They worked hard for that money. It's part of their blood, sweat, and tears. There's no difference between breaking somebody's legs and stealing their money to give to somebody else. So the only way to achieve so-called equality, and of course you can never achieve equality, is by use of force, by use of coercion. So equality is wrong. It's a bad, bad, bad idea. One of the worst ideas in human history, in my view. Now, there is a sense in which equality is good, in which equality is just. It appears in the Declaration of Independence, and I think when the founders use it, they mean it in a different sense. And that is equality before the law. We all have the same rights. That is, it's equally true that you're not allowed to steal from me and I'm not allowed to steal from you. And it doesn't matter if you're an aristocrat and I'm a peasant. Remember the context of the Declaration, right? We both murder, we should be treated the same as murderers. Equality before the law, equality before the state, equality of rights. We all have a right to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the meaning, the correct meaning, in my view, of equality. Any other equality, of outcome, but including of opportunity. These are evil concepts that require, and I use evil purposefully because I view force as evil, because they require forcing some to sacrifice for others, some to become, in some way, the slaves of others. Just because of luck, just because they happen to be more talented, they get their stuff taken away to be given to other people who, for whatever reason, are untalented. Is that my fault? No, you look like you're going to go.
No.
Let me just quickly address the issue of justice, and it's funny, you know, it's not funny, but it's common to put equality and justice together. But they're not the same thing. In our modern society, we attribute justice, equality to justice. Justice, in my view, you know, I take justice in the sense of the way it used to be used. Getting what you deserve. In the marketplace, that's mean getting based on how productive you are, what your value is in the marketplace. In life, justice would suggest that if you're moral and you're a good person, you get a happy, successful life. Now, that doesn't always work out. Luck, accident do play a role. But generally, justice is about desert. They're not about equality.
Thank you. Dr. Smith, for 2 minutes. Yes, in form of a rebuttal, or if you want to add to, if you didn't feel that you finished what you wanted to say in the original form.
Okay, so I think that I can see from Dr. was talking that the key sort of difference here is sort of the value that we place on just raw human suffering. And so the notion that I would have is that sometimes people are born, you know, because they live luck or because of unequal opportunity, and they're put in a situation where they're going to suffer for something. They don't have the marketable talents, or it's very difficult for them to fund their education, or they're sick, or they're suffering a pollution, and that we can make a small trade-off to reduce human suffering, and that's not always bad. I think that's the key there. So I wouldn't advocate that we attempt to eliminate all human suffering, that we try to make everyone equal, that we break Michael Jordan's legs, that we go to any of those extremes, but that to reduce some human suffering, to reduce, especially in the most extreme cases, what we have to coercively take, and I can see that you do that, I think would be small in comparison to the suffering that we would relieve. And so the reason why taking from Michael Jordan a little bit of his income is not the same as breaking his legs is because if you broke his legs, the amount of suffering that you would do to him is immense. But if you took 10% or 20% of his income, the amount of suffering that he would endure is probably not immense. But you could use that to fund the reduction in suffering of children who are born without a good opportunity for education, or people who are born with diseases, and make their suffering go way down. And so that trade-off reduces the overall amount of human suffering, and that's a good. That's a good into itself. It's a world where there's less suffering. And I think that might be the core difference.
Thank you. Dr. Brooks.
So I'll argue I'm not heartless. I do care about human suffering. But who gets to decide? Who gets to decide the value of Michael Jordan's legs versus 10% or 20%? Who gets to decide that X amount of suffering is worthy of coercing other people, but Y amount of suffering is not worthy of coercing other people? Where is this utility function that we can maximize? It doesn't exist, and it's immoral to do so. I believe that, yeah, if people are suffering and they ask for help, they're going to get help. We're benevolent. We don't want human beings to suffer. We're going to help them, and a society that's free of coercion is a benevolent, positive, healthy society in which people would help each other, but more than that, the amount of wealth being created would be astounding. And the number of people who truly were suffering to the extent that you would even consider coercing somebody else. I mean, the amount of people who really couldn't take care of themselves and the suffering would be so minute in such a society that charity could easily take care of that kind of suffering, that it would be a relatively irrelevant issue in a laissez-faire world. These so-called small trade-offs are how every government intervention starts, how every attempt, every statist policy starts. And I'm a big believer in slippery slopes. It's a slippery slope, and we slip down it very fast. Because, again, a little bit of suffering, but there's somebody over here that's suffering a little bit more and a little bit more. Look at how we got to that position today in America, where 50% of all the dollars spent on healthcare are spent by government. Right? It started with a small group of sufferers. Now it's almost everybody who receives government favors. So I think on principle it's wrong. In practice it doesn't work. You can't, and you know, again, the principle here is leave it up. If people want to help other people, and I believe they do, make it voluntary. Don't make it coercive.
Thank you. The second question, this goes first to Dr. Brooke. I mean, I think he was sort of hinting at this right at the end there. Both of these systems are effectively prospective. But what do your systems say about the status quo ex ante? Okay, let me put it this way. Do you care about how people accumulated property? Do you care about where people are at this moment in time? So both positions, for example, could be considered as rewarding sloth. You know, just the mixed economy, handing out money to someone who does not deserve it. The laissez-faire one saying, you know, what does that say about trust fund babies? Okay, both can be accused of rewarding immoral acquisition of property, of mediocrity. What does your system say about the status quo ex ante, which I think is a very important thing, and it first goes to Dr. Brooke before and then to Dr.
So let me see if I understand the question. So I would argue the status quo is, you know, today is a mixture of clear injustice, where people have gotten money that they did not earn, they did not deserve. On the other hand, we live in a system that is not free, so people are oppressed because they can't rise up, because they can't let the entrepreneurial spirit really shine. We live in a world today where cronyism is prevalent, where people benefit enormously from, you know, some people do, from lobbying government and having deals, insider deals with the government. You see it if you open the newspaper almost every day. Some people have been made rich by that, but other people, of course, have been made poor by the cronyism. Some businessmen benefit, some. All of that is true. The system we live today, which I think is a mixed economy, is an unjust economy. And it's immoral and it's wrong. The solution to it is to shift, is to start working aggressively towards more freedom, towards getting to the point where we have an economy that is based on moral principles, on the principles of freedom, of individual rights, of people pursuing their own life and their own happiness, free of this coercive element which is so prevalent in our society today. Now, what happens to trust fund babies in a laissez-faire economy? First of all, it's a small group. There are not that many super wealthy and children who can live off of trust funds. But so be it. So their life, let's say, you know, I look at somebody, he's got a trust fund with $1 billion and they're wasting their life away. And I go, poor guy. You know, they're the victim. They're suffering because they're withering their life out there. They're not going to be happy. They're not going to be successful. They're not going to get self-esteem because they're just taking money out of the trust fund. And so they're the victims of their own. Again, it's justice. They're the victims. Money is not how we measure success in life. I know that's astounding for the guy who claims to be pro-capitalist, but it's not about money. It's about happiness. A lot of us make choices not to be wealthy, but to teach, because teaching is more fun, right? We make choices like that all the time. The trust fund baby has money, but if he doesn't work, if he doesn't excel at something, if he doesn't apply himself, he'll be miserable. So he'll suffer. So who cares? It's not anybody else's money. We can't say, well, society could do something good with that money. It's not society's money. It's the guy who made it and who's left it to this trust fund baby. So I don't see these problems of sloth in a free market. Are they going to be lazy people? Yeah, most lazy people won't make a lot of money. They won't be happy. They won't be successful. Within their lifetime, they will suffer the consequences of their laziness. People who work hard will gain, hopefully, gain the self-esteem and gain the happiness that is the reward for working hard and being successful in what you do. So again, I think the free market in this sense is a system of justice. It's a system of fairness. It's a system that spiritually rewards those who apply themselves, those who have the right virtues to be successful, and those who choose not to have those virtues are going to fail in life, and that's the only failure that really counts.
Okay, thank you.
Answer the question.
Dr. Smith.
Okay, so I think that the injustices of the past and the immoralities happening in the past is part of what we want to insure against. And so I do think that attempting to adjudicate all past disputes is problematic and leads to a long series of score settling that we probably want to avoid. But rather than just simply ignoring that and saying, well, whatever happened, happened, and maybe you had a bad instinct, but that's just too bad. Part of what we want to do is say, well, look, there are unfortunate things about life, and one of the unfortunate things is perhaps you were born into an ethnic minority that has been persecuted. That's a common occurrence across the world, and that has affected your family, and that has affected your opportunity in life. And so what we can do is say that that's among the bad things that might happen to people that they had no control over, that we want to insure against and reduce the level of suffering associated with it. What I do kind of want to address in combining with Dr. Bush's last comment, if I can, is the slippery slope concept, and the idea there's no halfway house between laissez-faire and perhaps a completely socialist or communist economy. That's the criticism that the mixed economy got from the beginning. That's the argument that people had. But since the 1930s, 1940s, when this argument first began, the United States and much of Western Europe, but especially in the United States, has maintained a mixed economy that has not simply descended into socialism. And so over time, we've had, for example, you talked about welfare kids, we've had a more expansive welfare system, a more inclusive welfare system that had intergenerational people on welfare generation after generation, and we moved to reform that system to reduce the prospect of intergenerational welfare. And so that's evidence right there that we can observe problems happening, abuses of the system, and then pull it back and say that we want to have a little bit less. We're doing too much, we're promoting too much sloth, we're promoting we're going too far in hurting incentives. We had extensive regulations in the 1970s that we pulled back on. That's acceptance that we ran into the knowledge problem, and we can pull back. And so the mixed economy as an equilibrium can exist, and it's not just a slippery slope on the way to a completely totalitarian state.
You know?
No.
Okay. I was caught off guard there. That's okay. No, that's good. We're keeping well within the time. Dr. Brook, you have 2 minutes if you want.
Sure. So let me make 2 points. One about this restitution of past suffering. Somebody over there is a racist. I'm not. Why do I get to suffer because they're a racist? Or my great-grandfather. My father was a racist, let's say. He's not, but let's say he was. Right. Why is that my responsibility? And this goes to a deeper point related to the previous question. I don't like the fact that people are suffering, but somebody else's suffering is not a claim against my life. Somebody else's suffering is not a moral claim against me. It's not a commandment that I must act. They're suffering. It might be sad, it might not be sad, depending on who they are and why they're suffering. I then, within the context of my life, need to decide if I'm going to do something about it or not. But there's a choice. Our life, you know, for me, the moral purpose of my life is not service to others. It's service to my happiness. It's attainment of my happiness, my human flourishing, to put it in Aristotelian terms. Just quickly with regard to slippery slope. You know, just look at the Federal Register of Regulations. It goes like that. Now, yeah, we haven't achieved socialism, or declined into socialism, because that's a long slope. And we haven't gone to fascism, and there are bumps in the road, and you go up and down. But generally, if you look at government intervention into our lives in the economic sphere, it's different in other spheres, but clearly in the economic sphere, it has increased dramatically, and is increasing dramatically. And yes, the short periods in which we deregulate, which we control, even the welfare reform, is at least at the edges being reversed now by the Obama administration because of the crisis we're in, and it'll be very difficult to reverse it back to the Clinton era. We're seeing, and we'll see this over and over again. The general trend is still towards more and more statism, whether it's technically socialism or not. It's the growth of government is almost a constant.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
Right, so I want to be clear that I do think that there's danger in getting deep into adjudicating past injustice and trying to hold Dr. Brooks accountable for something his father did, which is why it's helpful to recognize that these things do happen to people, and that in the same way that you are not responsible for the injustice of the past, the children today who are suffering from them, and the people in the past, we're not responsible either. And what we have to make as a choice as individuals is not only what are we going to do for our lives, but what policies are we going to support, right? And so if we support the policy of doing nothing, that's a policy that we have chosen, and the consequences of it we have to accept. And so if we're saying we're choosing to do nothing, then we're saying we are choosing that children who are born to lower income circumstances because of things that they didn't control, or because of past in moral injustice, or even because of just bad luck, or because their parents were just not good at being parents, that we're going to allow them to simply sit there and suffer. That's a choice that we're making through our policy instruments. And so we have that, we don't lose moral responsibility for that simply because Dr. Brooks feels that only his flourishing is the concern. We still have more responsibility for all the choices that we make, including the choices of whether we're going to support this government policy or not.
Okay, thank you. Third question, and this goes to Dr. Smith first for the first 4 minutes. Third and final question, and then we'll open it up to audience questions, and we'll rid ourselves of the shackles of the debate format. We've talked you two, I haven't said very much, but you've talked a great deal about theory, these things in theory. But what about some empirics here? Can you provide an example